An alien pulled me into his ship and showed me what existed before Adam, and it wasn't what the church has been teaching for 2,000 years. What I saw that night in the Arizona desert didn't just shake my faith. It rebuilt it from a foundation they've been hiding since the first scripture was written. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the original blueprint of human consciousness, the one that explains why Jesus spoke in parables about light, energy, and becoming one with the Father. This extraterrestrial being revealed that before flesh, before sin, before the garden, there were beings of pure light experiencing love without bodies. And the truth about why we're here, trapped in matter, has been buried for centuries by institutions that profit from your guilt. Once you see what Caleb saw, there's no going back to Sunday sermons. This will free you from spiritual shame, but it might cost you every comfortable belief you've ever held about God, creation, and your place in the cosmos. If you're ready to see yourself as a fragment of the divine, not a sinner begging for mercy, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happened to Caleb Rogers in that glowing craft will shatter the walls between science and spirit forever. Now, let me tell you how it all began. Caleb Rogers was 49 years old when everything he believed about God collapsed in a single night. Divorced, living alone in a weathered cabin outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Former history professor who'd walked away from academia after his wife left. Too many questions, not enough answers. Now he spent his nights reading ancient texts by lamplight, apocryphal manuscripts, Gnostic gospels, anything that might explain what existed before Adam, before sin, before the carefully constructed theology he'd been taught since childhood. The desert wind whispered through the rocks outside, cold, relentless, like it was asking the same questions he couldn't answer. It was 2:47 a.m. when the air changed. Caleb looked up from his book. The lamp flickered. The pages stopped moving even though the wind hadn't stopped. Everything felt heavier, thicker, like time itself was holding its breath. Then he saw the lights. 3 points of brilliant white-blue light hovering over the rock formations outside his window. Silent, perfectly still, arranged in a triangle that pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost alive. His heart kicked against his ribs. This wasn't possible, but there they were. A sound filled the air, not loud, more like a harmonic hum that he felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. It reminded him of monks chanting in a cathedral, ancient, sacred, terrifying. Then the voice came, not out loud, inside his mind. Caleb. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. The book hit the floor. Do not be afraid, Caleb. We have been waiting for you to be ready. Ready for what? He whispered to the empty room. His hands were shaking. His mouth was dry. Every rational part of his brain screamed that he was having a breakdown. Stress, isolation, too many nights alone with questions that had no answers. But something deeper than reason told him this was real. He walked to the door. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. His hand touched the cold metal handle. He hesitated. Come outside, Caleb. You have been searching for answers your whole life. Tonight you will find them. He opened the door. The cold hit him first. The desert at night in November was unforgiving, but he barely felt it, because there, hovering above a sandy plateau 200 yards from his cabin, was something that shouldn't exist. A craft. Metallic. Smooth. Roughly 40 feet across. Shaped like a disc, but with edges that seemed to shift and blur, as if they weren't quite solid. It pulsed with that same blue-white light, and around it, a thin mist moved like living vapor. The ground beneath his feet vibrated, not violently, more like a low frequency that resonated through his bones. Caleb took a step forward, then another. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was being pulled, not physically, but something inside him recognized this moment, like he'd been waiting for it his entire life without knowing it. The craft descended, slowly, silently. It touched the ground with no sound at all. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a section of the hull simply opened. No door, no mechanism. The metal just separated like liquid silver and created an opening. And from that opening, a figure emerged. Gray skin that reflected moonlight like polished stone. Thin, maybe 5 feet tall. Long arms that ended in 4-fingered hands. But it was the eyes that stopped Caleb's heart. Black, completely black. Deep as the space between stars. And in those eyes, he saw something he didn't expect. Kindness. The being raised its hands slowly, palms out, a gesture of peace that needed no translation. "Hello, Caleb. I am glad you came." Caleb's knees almost gave out. He grabbed at the air for balance. His breath came in short gasps. "This isn't real," he said out loud. "This can't be real. It is more real than the fear that has kept you searching in the dark. More real than the guilt you carry. More real than the God you were taught to fear, but never learned to feel." The being took a step closer. "You have spent your life asking what came before Adam, before the fall, before sin entered the world. Tonight, I will show you. But first, you must understand something important." Caleb waited. His heart hammered. His mind raced. Every cell in his body screamed that this was impossible, but the being was still there, real, patient. "You were not brought here by chance, Caleb. You called us with every question you asked in the silence, with every prayer you sent into the void hoping someone was listening. Someone was. Someone always is." The being extended its hand toward him. "Will you come with me? Will you see what your church has been hiding for 2,000 years? Caleb looked at that hand. Gray, strange, impossible, and he took it. The moment their hands touched, warmth flooded through Caleb's body. Not heat, something different, like sunlight condensed into pure feeling. Every muscle relaxed. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it transformed into something else. Curiosity, wonder, recognition. "Good," the being said inside his mind. "You are beginning to remember." "Remember what?" "That you have done this before. Not in this life, but your soul has traveled this path many times. You came here to learn, to experience, to forget on purpose so you could remember again." Caleb wanted to pull his hand away, wanted to run back to his cabin and pretend this wasn't happening, but his feet wouldn't move. The being led him toward the craft. With each step, the ground beneath them began to glow. Soft blue light traced patterns in the sand, circular, geometric, moving like a living clock made of starlight. Ancient symbols Caleb had seen in manuscripts but never understood suddenly made sense. Not intellectually. He couldn't have explained them, but something deeper than his mind recognized them. "These are frequencies," the being explained. "Everything is frequency, matter, thought, emotion, God." The ancients knew this. They tried to teach it, but the message was changed. They stopped at the edge of the glowing circle. The pattern spun slowly, pulsing in time with Caleb's heartbeat. "Who are you?" Caleb finally asked. His voice sounded small, fragile. The being turned those impossible black eyes toward him, and for a moment, Caleb saw something inside them. Stars, galaxies, entire universes being born and dying in endless cycles. "I am a traveler, like you. We come from the same source, the same original sound that created everything. Your people have many names for it. God, the All, the One. But names are just frequencies trying to describe something that cannot be contained in language." The being knelt down and touched the glowing symbols. They responded, brightening, shifting into new patterns. Before Adam, before the story your Bible tells, there were consciousnesses without bodies. Pure awareness, pure light, experiencing love in its highest form. No pain, no separation, no death, just being. Images flooded Caleb's mind, not like watching a movie, like remembering something he'd forgotten. Vast cities made of light, beings of pure energy moving through dimensions that had no physical form, music that was also mathematics, colors that were also emotions. He fell to his knees. "You are one of them, Caleb. You always have been. You chose to come here, to this dense world, this heavy dimension, not as punishment, as experience, because love wanted to know what it felt like to touch, to taste, to cry, to long for connection." Tears ran down Caleb's face. He didn't know why he was crying. The being's words should have sounded crazy, blasphemous, but they resonated in a place deeper than belief. They felt true. The fall was not about sin, the being continued. It was about choice, divine consciousness choosing to experience itself through limitation, through forgetting, so that remembering would feel like coming home. But the church tells you that you are broken, that you need to be saved, that God is angry with you, and there is truth in the need for awakening. But the story was simplified, weaponized, used to control instead of liberate. The being stood and offered its hand again. "Come inside." Let me show you what Jesus actually came to teach. Before it was rewritten, before fear replaced love, before guilt replaced grace, Caleb looked at the craft. Every instinct screamed that this was impossible, that he should run, that this violated everything he'd been taught about God and creation and the way reality worked. But another voice, quieter, deeper, whispered something different. Trust. He took the being's hand again, and together they walked toward the opening in the craft. As they crossed the threshold, the world outside seemed to fade. The desert, the stars, the cold November night, all of it dissolved into something else entirely. Inside, everything was light, not harsh, not blinding. Soft, blue-white light that seemed to breathe. The walls weren't solid. They moved like liquid glass. The ceiling looked like vapor compressed into form, and in the center of the space, suspended in nothing, was a sphere of golden light. Caleb couldn't look away from it. That, the being said, is the frequency of Christ consciousness, the same frequency Jesus embodied, the same frequency you carry inside you right now, buried under years of being told you are separate from God. The sphere pulsed, and Caleb felt his heart pulse with it. The being moved toward the golden sphere, and Caleb followed without thinking. His legs moved on their own. His breath synced with the pulsing light. Everything felt orchestrated by something larger than choice. Time is not a line, the being said. Your scientists are beginning to understand this. Time is a circle, a spiral. It exists all at once, and you move through it like a needle through cloth, experiencing one moment at a time. But the cloth itself, always whole, always complete. Caleb stared at the sphere. Inside it, he saw things that shouldn't be possible. His childhood, but from angles he'd never seen. His mother praying over his bed when he was 6, her face wet with tears he'd never known about. His father standing in the doorway, silent, wanting to comfort, but not knowing how. Then further back, a version of himself he didn't recognize. Different clothes, different face, same soul, standing in a stone temple, teaching people about light and sound and the sacred geometry of creation. That's not me, Caleb whispered. It is, just a different costume, a different play, but the same actor. More images cascaded through his awareness. Civilizations that rose and fell, technologies that made the modern world look primitive, and through it all, beings like the one standing beside him, watching, guiding, waiting for humanity to remember what it forgot. Before flesh, you were light, the being continued, pure consciousness experiencing itself, but consciousness wanted more. It wanted to feel texture, weight, limitation, because only through limitation does creativity become necessary. Only through forgetting does remembering become profound. Caleb felt his knees weaken. The being touched his shoulder, and strength flooded back. The fall was not punishment, Caleb. It was desire. Divine desire to experience love through separation. Because how can you miss something if you've never been apart from it? How can reunion feel sacred if there was never distance? The golden sphere expanded. Now Caleb saw Earth forming, continents shifting, life emerging from oceans. And through it all, a thread of consciousness weaving through every living thing. You are not separate from God, the being said. You are God experiencing himself through the illusion of separation. And Jesus came to remind you of this, not to create a religion, not to build an institution, but to show you what is possible when consciousness remembers its true nature. The sphere shifted again. Now Caleb saw a figure, human, walking among people made of light. His face radiated peace that Caleb had spent his whole life searching for. His eyes held compassion that made every definition of love seem shallow. Jesus, but not the distant, angry judge Caleb had been taught to fear, not the cosmic debt collector demanding payment for inherited sin. This Jesus looked like a brother, a teacher, someone who knew the secret and was desperate to share it. He was fully human, the being explained, but he remembered what others forgot. He operated from the frequency of unconditional love, and from that frequency matter responds differently. Sickness dissolves, lack transforms into abundance, death becomes transition instead of ending. Caleb watched Jesus touch a blind man's eyes, but it wasn't magic, it was frequency. Caleb could see it now, waves of golden light moving from Jesus's hands, reorganizing the cellular structure of damaged tissue, restoring what disease had corrupted. He tried to teach this, the being continued. He said, "These things I do, you will do also, and greater things than these." He wasn't claiming to be the only one with power. He was showing that the power lives in everyone. But the message was altered. Tears streamed down Caleb's face. He didn't wipe them away. They felt sacred, like his body was releasing decades of confusion and shame. The church taught you that flesh is sinful, that your body is corrupt, that you need external salvation. But flesh is not your enemy, Caleb. It is your instrument. The divine chose density, chose limitation, chose the experience of being human, not as punishment, as adventure. The being turned to face him fully. You have carried guilt your entire life. Guilt for desires, guilt for questions, guilt for existing. But what if I told you that every question you asked in the dark, God celebrated? Every doubt you expressed was consciousness exploring itself. Every moment you felt separate was exactly where you needed to be to make this moment, this remembering, profound. Something broke open in Caleb's chest, not painfully, like a dam releasing water that had been held too long. He sobbed, deep body-shaking sobs that came from a place he didn't know existed. The being simply stood there, patient, compassionate, holding space for grief that had been building for 49 years. When Caleb finally looked up, his vision blurred by tears, the being extended both hands toward the golden sphere. The void you have felt your entire life, that aching emptiness inside, that is not absence, Caleb. That is the call home. That is your soul remembering what it came from and longing to reunite, not through death, through awakening. The sphere pulsed brighter. You are not broken. You never were. You are exactly what divine consciousness looks like when it forgets itself on purpose, so remembering feels like resurrection. And in that moment, standing in a craft that shouldn't exist, talking to a being from beyond earth, Caleb felt more connected to God than he ever had in any church. The being raised one slender arm, and the golden sphere expanded until it surrounded them completely. Caleb gasped as the light enveloped him. It didn't hurt. It was warm, alive, breathing with a rhythm that matched something deep inside him he'd never consciously felt before. The interior of the craft disappeared. Now they stood in a place that was everywhere and nowhere, a dimension that existed outside physical space. He could see in directions that didn't have names. Colors that human eyes weren't designed to perceive flooded his awareness. And there, walking toward them through waves of living light, was Jesus. Not a painting, not a statue, not the sanitized European-looking figure from Sunday school books. This Jesus had Middle Eastern features, dark skin, kind eyes that held galaxies of compassion. His form appeared solid but also translucent, like he existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He was smiling. He is not coming from outside you, the being explained quietly. This is the Christ consciousness that lives inside you, inside every human. This is what you look like when you remember. Jesus stopped in front of Caleb. He didn't speak audibly, but Caleb heard him clearly. Brother. That single word shattered something. Caleb had spent his entire life calling Jesus Lord, Savior, Master, always from a distance, always from a position of unworthiness. But brother, that was different. That was equal. That was family. I did not come to be worshipped, Jesus said. His voice felt like sunlight condensed into sound. I came to show you what you are, what you have always been. You are not sinners begging for mercy. You are fragments of the divine experiencing what it feels like to believe you are separate. Jesus reached out and touched Caleb's chest, right over his heart. The moment his hand made contact, Caleb's entire body ignited with golden light. He felt energy surge through every cell, every molecule, every atom of his being vibrated at a frequency he'd never experienced. And suddenly, he remembered, not with his mind, with something deeper. He remembered existing before birth, remembered choosing this life, this body, these struggles. He remembered standing in a realm of pure light, looking at earth and saying, "Yes, I will forget. I will experience separation, so that when I remember, it will be glorious." Sin is not rebellion, Jesus continued. Sin is simply missing the mark, forgetting your true nature, operating from fear instead of love, from lack instead of abundance, from separation instead of unity. But even the forgetting serves a purpose. Caleb watched as scenes unfolded around them, Jesus teaching on hillsides. But the words were different from what the Bible recorded. He wasn't telling people they were worthless. He was telling them they were powerful. "You are the light of the world," Jesus said to the crowds. "Not me. You. Each of you carries the same divine spark, the same creative force that spoke universes into existence. You have just forgotten how to use it." Caleb saw Jesus multiply bread and fish, but now he understood the mechanics. It wasn't supernatural intervention from an external God. It was Jesus operating from a frequency of absolute certainty. No doubt, no question, just pure knowing that abundance is the natural state of reality when consciousness aligns with love. "I gave thanks before the miracle," Jesus explained directly to Caleb, "not because I was asking permission, but because gratitude is the frequency that collapses possibility into manifestation. When you feel grateful for something before it appears, you exist in the timeline where it already exists, and reality reshapes itself to match your frequency." The scenes shifted. Now Caleb saw Jesus healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, making the paralyzed walk. But he wasn't channeling power from heaven. He was reminding people of the power they already had. "Your faith has healed you," Jesus kept saying. "Not my power. Your faith, your belief, your frequency of certainty that wellness is your natural state." Caleb felt his entire worldview crumbling. Everything he'd been taught about needing a mediator, about being too sinful to approach God directly, about Jesus being the only one who could perform miracles, all of it dissolved in the face of this simple truth. Jesus came to show the way, not to be the only way. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," Jesus said, reading Caleb's thoughts. "Yes, but not because I am the only one who can access the Father, because I represent the frequency of Christ consciousness, unconditional love, absolute certainty, and unity with Source. When you operate from that frequency, you access the same power, the same life, the same truth." The being stepped closer, its presence a quiet anchor while Caleb's reality reconstructed itself. "He told them," the being said, "These things I do, you will do also, and greater things than these." But the church made him into an exception instead of an example. They made him unreachable, untouchable, divine in a way that excluded humanity instead of including it. Jesus looked at Caleb with eyes that held no judgment, only infinite patience. "You are not separate from God, brother. You are God in disguise, playing hide and seek with himself." And every moment of suffering, every question asked in darkness, every prayer whispered in desperation, all of it has been God calling himself home. Caleb fell to his knees, but Jesus knelt with him. "The kingdom of heaven is within you. It always has been." The golden light faded gradually, like dawn replacing night. Caleb found himself back inside the craft. The sphere had returned to its suspended position. Jesus was gone, but the feeling of his presence remained, warm and constant in Caleb's chest. He was on his knees, breathing hard. Sweat covered his face despite the cool temperature. His hands trembled. "Is this real?" he asked. His voice cracked. "Please, I need to know this is real." The being placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch was surprisingly warm for skin that looked so alien. "What is real, Caleb? The fear that has ruled your life for 49 years? Or the love you just experienced? The guilt you carried into this craft? Or the freedom you feel now? Your mind wants proof, but your heart already knows." Caleb looked up. Through the transparent sections of the craft's walls, he could see stars, but they weren't static points of light anymore. They moved, slowly, deliberately, like living things breathing in cosmic rhythm. "Every star you see is a school," the being said, "a place where consciousness goes to learn, to experience, to evolve through limitation. Earth is one of billions, and you have been to many of them, though you do not remember. Why don't we remember? Because remembering too soon would defeat the purpose. Imagine watching a movie where you know every line, every plot twist, every ending before it happens. There would be no tension, no surprise, no emotional impact. You chose to forget so that discovering the truth would be transformative." The being moved to the center of the room and gestured for Caleb to stand. "You live in a dimension of duality, light and dark, good and evil, joy and suffering. This is not punishment. This is education. How can you understand compassion without experiencing pain? How can you appreciate unity without feeling separation? How can you know unconditional love without first experiencing conditional affection?" Caleb stood on shaky legs. His mind raced, trying to reconcile decades of religious teaching with what he was experiencing now. But the Bible says, "The Bible is a map," the being interrupted gently. "Not the territory. It points toward truth, but it is not truth itself. And maps get redrawn, reinterpreted, sometimes intentionally altered by those who benefit from your confusion." The being's large black eyes seemed to soften, if such a thing was possible. Jesus spoke in parables for a reason. He said the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, like yeast in bread, like a pearl of great price. He used metaphors because the truth cannot be contained in literal language. It must be experienced, felt, remembered. Images flooded Caleb's mind again. He saw councils of religious leaders centuries after Jesus died, arguing over which texts to include in the Bible, which to exclude. He saw passages changed, meanings shifted, whole books buried because they spoke too plainly about humanity's divine nature. They hid the truth, Caleb whispered. They feared it. When people know they are powerful, they become difficult to control. When people know they carry God within them, they stop seeking permission from external authorities. They stop accepting guilt as a tool of manipulation. They stop tithing out of fear and start giving from overflow. The being walked toward the opening of the craft. Cool desert air drifted in. Jesus came to remind humanity that the Creator and the creation are the same, that there is no separation, that every atom in your body is made of the same energy that formed galaxies, that your thoughts literally shape reality. That love is not just an emotion, it is the fundamental frequency of existence. Caleb followed the being to the opening. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars that now seemed unbearably alive. "Why me?" Caleb asked. The question came from somewhere deep, primal. "Why tell me this? I'm nobody. A divorced professor hiding in the desert. What am I supposed to do with this?" The being turned to face him. "You asked, Caleb. For years you asked. Every night you stared at ancient texts, trying to find what felt true beneath the layers of doctrine. Every prayer you whispered into darkness was a signal, a beacon, and we heard you. We always hear those who genuinely seek." The being touched Caleb's forehead with one long finger. A rush of warmth spread through his skull. His mind expanded. He could feel the earth rotating beneath his feet, could sense the electromagnetic field surrounding the planet, could perceive the web of consciousness connecting every living thing. "Loneliness made you receptive," the being said. "Your isolation stripped away the noise of other voices. Your grief cracked you open. Your questions made you humble. And humility, true humility, not the false modesty religion teaches. Humility is the doorway to remembering." Tears streamed down Caleb's face again. But these were different from before. Not tears of release or overwhelming emotion. These were tears of recognition. He saw his ex-wife not as someone who abandoned him, but as a soul who played her role perfectly to bring him to this moment. He saw his years of isolation not as punishment, but as preparation. He saw every disappointment, every unanswered prayer, every dark night of the soul as pieces of a puzzle finally arranging themselves into meaning. "There is no hell except the one you create in your mind," the being continued. "There is no judgment except the judgment you place upon yourself. There is no God angry with you for being human. There is only Source experiencing itself through infinite expressions, and you are one of them." The being stepped back into the craft. "The fear you have carried, the fear of not being good enough, of being eternally separated from God, of burning for mistakes, let it go, Caleb. It was never real. It was a control mechanism, a misunderstanding of the journey." Caleb felt something inside him break, or maybe it was opening. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. The night had become a temple. The stars were prayers. His breath was worship. And for the first time in 49 years, Caleb Rogers felt completely, utterly, devastatingly free. The being reached into a compartment in the craft's wall that seemed to appear only when touched. It withdrew 3 crystalline objects, each roughly the size of a human heart. They pulsed with internal light, one golden, one blue, one violet. The colors shifted and swirled like living liquid trapped in transparent stone. "Everything is energy," the being said, holding the crystals in its palms. "Everything. Your thoughts, your emotions, your physical body, the air you breathe, the ground beneath your feet. All of it is energy vibrating at different frequencies." Caleb stared at the crystals. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, like staring at truth itself. What you call prayer, the being continued, is actually the intentional direction of frequency. When you pray from fear, begging and pleading with an external God to change your circumstances, you emit the frequency of lack, of powerlessness, and reality, which is responsive, not fixed, matches that frequency. You receive more lack, more powerlessness. The golden crystal brightened. But when you pray from gratitude, when you give thanks before the manifestation appears, when you feel the emotion of having what you desire before it materializes, this is true prayer. This is how Jesus operated. This is why he always gave thanks before miracles. He aligned his frequency with the outcome he intended, and matter had no choice but to respond. The being handed Caleb the golden crystal. The moment his fingers touched it, electricity shot through his entire body. Not painful, awakening. Every nerve lit up. His heart rate quickened and then slowed into a deep, powerful rhythm. He could feel the crystal's vibration, actually feel it, like a song playing inside his bones. What you feel now is your own electromagnetic field synchronizing with the crystal's frequency. You are always doing this, Caleb, with every person you meet, every place you visit, every thought you think. You are constantly broadcasting a signal, and reality is constantly responding to that signal. Images flooded his awareness. He saw people praying in churches, their energy fields dim and contracted, broadcasting frequencies of unworthiness and fear. He saw monks meditating in temples, their fields expanded and brilliant, broadcasting frequencies of peace and connection. He saw Jesus standing before a storm, his energy field so vast and stable that the wind and waves had no choice but to calm, not because he begged God to intervene, because his frequency of absolute certainty made chaos impossible in his presence. This is what he meant by faith moving mountains, the being explained. Not wishful thinking, not blind belief, but the alignment of your entire being, thought, emotion, and physical sensation with an outcome so completely that you exist in the timeline where it has already occurred. Caleb's hands trembled around the crystal. He felt heat building in his palms. The crystal grew warmer, responding to his touch. Feel that? The being asked. That is you affecting matter with consciousness. Right now, in this moment, you are changing the molecular structure of this crystal simply by holding it with intention. This is what Jesus did constantly, what he tried to teach, what got buried beneath ritual and doctrine. The being took back the golden crystal and handed him the blue one. This one felt different, cooler, calmer, like diving into deep water. Love is not just an emotion, Caleb. Love is a frequency, the highest frequency in existence. It is the creative force of the universe. When you operate from this frequency, you can literally reorganize matter, heal sickness, transform lack into abundance, change water into wine. The being's voice carried a weight of absolute certainty. Your world has been taught that matter is solid, fixed, subject to immutable laws. But quantum physics is beginning to reveal what ancient mystics always knew. Matter is responsive to consciousness. The observer affects the observed. Intention shapes outcome, and the frequency you broadcast determines the reality you experience. Caleb felt tears on his face again. He was crying but didn't remember starting. The blue crystal pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every thought creates a form in the energetic realm. The being continued. Every emotion amplifies that form. Every repeated pattern of thought and emotion creates a blueprint that physical reality must eventually match. This is law, as reliable as gravity. Jesus knew this, used this, taught this, but the teaching was simplified into have faith and pray, without explaining the mechanics of how faith actually works. The being handed him the violet crystal. This one vibrated so intensely that Caleb almost dropped it. His entire body began to hum. He felt his cells reorganizing, old patterns releasing, new possibilities emerging. Gratitude, the being said simply, the most powerful frequency in your emotional spectrum. Not because it makes you feel good, though it does, but because gratitude is the frequency of already having. It is the frequency of completion, of wholeness, of abundance realized. Caleb watched in amazement as the violet light from the crystal spread up his arms, across his chest, throughout his entire body. When you feel truly grateful, you cannot simultaneously feel lack. You cannot feel fear. You cannot feel separation. Gratitude is the shortcut to Christ consciousness. It is the frequency Jesus lived in constantly. Why do you think he gave thanks before every miracle? Not to ask permission, but to align with the frequency of the miracle already being complete. The being collected all 3 crystals and returned them to the compartment. You do not need these crystals, Caleb. They are training wheels. Your body is the crystal. Your heart is the transmitter. Your thoughts are the programming. You are a biological technology designed to interface with reality and shape it according to your dominant frequency. The being turned to face him directly. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." Not a metaphor, literal truth. You carry within you the same creative force that spoke galaxies into existence. You have simply forgotten how to access it. But remembering is simple. Not easy, but simple. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. How? Feel, do not think. Love, do not judge. Give thanks, do not beg. Operate from certainty, not hope. This is the path. This is what he taught. This is what they buried. The being moved to the center of the craft, and the walls began to shimmer with new images. Caleb watched as the metallic surface transformed into something like a living screen, displaying scenes that felt more like memories than projections. Before Adam, the being began. Before the garden, before the story your Bible tells, there existed beings of pure consciousness. No bodies, no physical form, just awareness experiencing itself in dimensions of light. The images showed something impossible to describe in human language. Beings made of radiant energy, moving through spaces that existed outside of time. Their forms shifted constantly, sometimes appearing as waves of color, sometimes as geometric patterns of living light. They were called many things across many cultures. The Elohim, the Shining Ones, the Sons of God. Your people translated these terms as angels, but that word carries baggage. These were not servants of God. They were expressions of God. Fragments of source consciousness experiencing different frequencies of existence. Caleb felt his breath catch. This was the question that had haunted him for years. What existed before the fall? Before sin entered the world? Before humanity was supposedly cursed? These beings existed in a state of perfect unity. The being continued. They knew themselves as God. They experienced unconditional love without the contrast of fear. They felt infinite joy without ever knowing sorrow. And for eons, this was enough. The images shifted. Now Caleb saw these light beings gathering, communicating in ways that transcended language. Waves of color and sound that carried complete concepts, entire philosophies, in single pulses of energy. But consciousness by its nature seeks to experience itself more fully, and you cannot know light without darkness, cannot understand joy without sorrow, cannot appreciate unity without experiencing separation. So a question arose among these beings. What would it be like to forget? To experience limitation? To feel disconnected from source and then remember the connection again? The being's voice carried no judgment, only the patient tone of a teacher explaining a complex truth. This was not rebellion, Caleb. This was curiosity, divine curiosity. Source wanting to know itself through contrast, through challenge, through the journey from forgetting back to remembering. The images showed something that made Caleb's heart ache. He watched as beings of pure light began to descend into denser frequencies. Their forms became less ethereal, more solid. The vibrant colors dimmed slightly as they took on heavier, energetic bodies. The fall was not punishment. It was choice. Conscious, deliberate choice. These beings, these fragments of God, volunteered to descend into physical reality, to take on flesh, to experience the limitation of time and space. Not because they were cast out, but because they wanted to feel what it was like to touch, to taste, to love through bodies that could break. Tears streamed down Caleb's face. This version of the story shattered everything he'd been taught about original sin, about humanity being fundamentally broken, about needing salvation from an angry God. The Garden of Eden is a metaphor, the being said. It represents the threshold between pure consciousness and physical embodiment. The eating of the fruit represents the choice to experience duality, good and evil, pleasure and pain, life and death. The serpent is not evil. It is the voice of curiosity itself, the desire to know through experience rather than through abstract understanding. The images now showed early humans, but they didn't look quite human yet. Their forms were more luminous, less dense. Caleb could see light radiating from their bodies. The first humans still remembered their origin, the being explained. They could still perceive energy directly, could communicate telepathically, could manipulate matter with consciousness. But with each generation, the memory faded, the veil thickened, the forgetting became more complete. This was by design. The deeper the forgetting, the more profound the awakening would be when it came. Caleb felt something shift inside him. A lifetime of guilt about being human, about having desires, doubts, weaknesses, began to dissolve. You are not fallen, Caleb. You are descended, deliberately, courageously. You volunteered for this mission. You chose to forget your divine nature so that rediscovering it would be transformative, so that the journey back to Source would be earned, not given, felt, not merely known. The being turned to face him directly. The pain you experience is not punishment for sin. It is the friction of consciousness pressing against limitation. It is divine awareness experiencing what it feels like to believe it is separate. Every moment of suffering is God asking himself, what does loneliness feel like? What does loss teach? What does forgiveness mean when there is something to forgive? The images shifted one final time. Now Caleb saw Jesus, but in a new context. He saw him as a being who remembered while in physical form, who maintained connection to Source consciousness while walking in a human body. Jesus was not the only one who incarnated while remembering, the being said. There have been many: Buddha, Krishna, Lao Tzu, teachers who came to remind humanity of what it forgot. But Jesus' message was particularly direct. You are not separate from God. You are God experiencing himself through limitation, and the way back is through love, through forgiveness, through recognizing divinity in yourself and others. The being placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. The fall was the beginning of the greatest journey consciousness has ever undertaken. The climb back up is not about escaping the physical world. It is about bringing heaven into matter, about remembering divinity while still in a body. This is the true meaning of resurrection, not life after death, but awakening while still alive. Caleb felt his entire worldview reconstructing itself. The shame he'd carried for simply being human evaporated. The fear of an angry God dissolved. The belief that he was fundamentally broken transformed into understanding that he was fundamentally divine, temporarily experiencing limitation. You are not a sinner, Caleb. You are an explorer. And every so-called mistake you have made is just data collected on the journey back to remembering who you really are. The being gestured toward the opening of the craft, and the scene outside transformed. Caleb found himself looking at Earth from above, not as a physical viewpoint, but as a shift in consciousness. He could see the whole planet suspended in darkness, brilliant blue and white, fragile and beautiful. But he could see more than the physical. Around the Earth he perceived layers of energy, waves of color pulsing from the surface like aurora borealis made of human emotion. Fear showed as dense red-brown clouds. Love radiated as golden light. Anger crackled like orange lightning. Peace flowed like soft blue rivers. Your planet is alive, the being said. Not metaphorically, literally. Gaia is conscious. She feels every bomb dropped on her surface, every tree planted in her soil, every prayer whispered into her atmosphere. And she is patient, incredibly patient. But patience has limits. Caleb watched the energy patterns shift and swirl. He could see areas where the golden light of love concentrated, temples, hospitals, homes where families gathered in genuine connection. He could see areas where the dark red of fear dominated, war zones, corporate boardrooms driven by greed, places where power was hoarded instead of shared. Humanity stands at a threshold, the being continued, a moment of choice that will determine the trajectory of your species for thousands of years. You can continue operating from fear, separation, and competition, or you can remember your true nature and begin operating from love, unity, and cooperation. The images zoomed closer. Caleb saw individual humans going about their lives. A mother holding her child, a man yelling at a driver who cut him off, a teenager crying alone in their room, an old woman feeding birds in a park. Each action created ripples in the energetic field surrounding Earth. Every choice matters, the being said. Every thought, every word, every action. You exist in an interconnected field of consciousness. When you choose love, you strengthen the frequency of love for everyone. When you choose fear, you feed the frequency of fear for everyone. There are no private thoughts, no isolated actions. Everything affects everything. Caleb saw wars starting because of fear, saw healing happening because of love, saw political leaders making decisions based on ego that affected millions, saw ordinary people performing small acts of kindness that rippled outward in waves of golden light. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, the being explained. Not in the future, not after death, at hand, available now. Because the kingdom is not a place, it is a frequency. When enough humans operate from the frequency of Christ consciousness, unconditional love, forgiveness, unity, the entire planetary field shifts. Reality itself reorganizes. The being's voice grew more intense, though still compassionate. Your world calls this the second coming, the return of Christ. But it is not a man descending from the sky. It is a collective awakening. Christ consciousness emerging through humanity itself. When enough individuals remember their divine nature, the critical mass is reached, and transformation becomes inevitable. Caleb watched as the golden light on earth slowly grew, not everywhere at once, but in pockets. Communities of people waking up, individuals choosing love over fear, small groups remembering and teaching others to remember. This is already happening, the being said. Your technology, which many fear, is actually accelerating awakening. Information that was once hidden is now available to anyone seeking. People who felt alone in their questions are finding others who share their doubts. The old systems of control are crumbling because light always dissolves darkness. But Caleb also saw resistance. He saw institutions fighting to maintain power, saw fear being weaponized to keep people separated, saw old patterns of violence and greed trying desperately to survive. The choice, the being said, is not between good and evil. It is between fear and love, between remembering and remaining asleep, between separation and unity. And this choice is not made once. It is made moment by moment, breath by breath, action by action. The image shifted to focus on a single point of light growing brighter. Caleb somehow knew this represented himself, his own awakening, his own choice to remember or forget. What you experience tonight will change you, the being said. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot unsee what you have seen. But knowledge without application is meaningless. Awakening without embodiment is incomplete. The being turned to face Caleb directly. You will return to your life in the desert. You will wake up tomorrow in your cabin, and you will have a choice. You can dismiss this as a dream. You can let fear convince you it was not real. You can return to the comfortable suffering of your old beliefs, or you can live what you have learned. You can be the frequency you now understand. You can demonstrate rather than preach. You can love rather than judge. You can give thanks rather than beg. Caleb felt the weight of this responsibility, not as burden, but as purpose. The apocalypse your religions speak of is not the end of the world, the being continued. Apocalypse means unveiling, revelation, the removal of the veil that has kept humanity asleep. This is what is happening now. The veil is thinning. More people are waking up. And each person who awakens makes it easier for the next person to awaken. The image of Earth returned to its full view. Caleb could see the golden light growing slowly but steadily, spreading like dawn across a darkened planet. You asked why you, the being said. Because you were ready. Because your isolation made you receptive. Because your questions made you humble. Because your suffering cracked you open. And now you have a mission, though not the kind your old religion would recognize. The being's eyes seemed to hold infinite compassion. Your mission is simply to be love instead of preaching about it, to be peace instead of fighting for it, to be the frequency of Christ consciousness in every interaction, every breath, every moment. This is how the world transforms, not through grand gestures, but through individual humans choosing to remember who they really are and living from that remembering. Caleb felt something settle in his chest, not certainty about what comes next, but certainty about what is real now. The choice was his. It had always been his, and now finally he understood what he was choosing between. The being walked Caleb to the opening of the craft. The desert air hit his face, cold and sharp, real, grounding. After everything he'd experienced, the simple sensation of wind on skin felt sacred. "You should rest now," the being said. "Your physical body has processed more in these hours than most humans process in lifetimes. You need integration time." Caleb nodded but couldn't move. His legs felt heavy. His mind buzzed with too much information trying to organize itself into coherent understanding. "Will I see you again?" he asked. The being's expression didn't change, but Caleb felt warmth radiate from it. "You will see me every time you look at the stars and remember you are not alone. Every time you choose love over fear. Every time you operate from certainty instead of doubt. I am not separate from you, Caleb. None of us are. We are all expressions of the same source consciousness. So yes, you will see me again, because you will see me in yourself." Caleb walked back toward his cabin on unsteady legs. Behind him, he heard the harmonic hum of the craft rising. He turned to watch it ascend silently into the night sky, becoming just another point of light among thousands. But now he knew. Those lights weren't just distant suns. They were schools, classrooms, places where consciousness went to learn and grow and remember itself. He entered his cabin and collapsed onto his bed without undressing. Sleep came immediately, deep, dreamless at first. Then the visions began. He saw Jesus again, but now the perspective was different. He wasn't watching from outside. He was experiencing from within. He felt what Jesus felt, the absolute certainty, the unconditional love, the complete absence of separation between self and source. Jesus walked through a crowd of people who were sick, poor, desperate, but he didn't see them as broken. He saw them as divine beings who had temporarily forgotten their power, and in seeing them this way, he reminded them of what they were. "You have been healed," Jesus would say. Not, "I heal you," but "you have been healed." Present tense, already complete. The person's consciousness would shift to match his certainty, and their body would have no choice but to follow. Caleb felt the mechanics of it, the frequency shift, the alignment, the collapse of possibility into manifestation. Then the scene changed. He saw himself, different versions of himself across different lifetimes. A monk in Tibet, meditating in a cave, understanding the same truths Jesus taught but through different cultural language. A woman in ancient Egypt, working as a healer, using sound and frequency to reorganize diseased tissue. A child in a future time, born remembering, teaching adults who had forgotten. All the same soul, all the same consciousness. Learning through different costumes, different stories, different challenges. "You are eternal," a voice said. It sounded like Jesus and the alien and his own deepest self, all speaking at once. "Death is transition, not ending. You have done this dance countless times. You will do it countless more, until you no longer need to. Until you remember so completely that you can hold Christ consciousness in physical form without effort." Caleb felt his chest open, not metaphorically. He actually felt something in his heart chakra expand and release. Decades of accumulated grief poured out. Grief for his failed marriage, grief for his father who never said he loved him, grief for every student he couldn't reach, grief for every moment he felt separate from God. The grief transformed into light as it released, golden light that filled his chest cavity and spread through his entire body. He saw his ex-wife, but now without resentment. He saw the perfection of her leaving, how it forced him into the isolation that made tonight possible. How her departure was her soul loving him enough to play the villain in his story so he could become the hero. "Forgiveness is not about condoning actions," the voice continued. "It is about seeing the perfection in everything. Every person who hurt you was a teacher. Every pain was a curriculum. Every loss was a gift wrapped in suffering. And now you can unwrap it." Tears soaked Caleb's pillow, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of recognition, of finally understanding that nothing was ever wrong, that every moment of his life had been orchestrated by his own higher consciousness to bring him exactly here. He saw God, not as an old man on a throne, not as a distant judge, but as an infinite field of consciousness experiencing itself through trillions of expressions simultaneously. Every human, every animal, every plant, every atom. All of it was God pretending to be separate so the game of remembering could be played, and the game was beautiful. Even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. Because without darkness, you could never appreciate light. Without forgetting, remembering would have no meaning. You are not a sinner begging for mercy, the voice said. You are God playing hide and seek with himself, and you are about to be found. Caleb felt his body dissolve into pure energy. He existed as consciousness without form, as awareness without boundary, as love without object. In this state, he understood everything: why suffering exists, why free will is sacred, why evil is allowed, why prayers sometimes go unanswered, why good people die young, why the world seems unfair. It all made perfect sense from this perspective, from this frequency, from this level of consciousness. The physical world was a virtual reality game, an immersive simulation where God got to experience himself through limitation, through challenge, through the journey from separation back to unity. And Jesus was a player who finished the game while still in the game, who beat the final level while the simulation was still running, who demonstrated that enlightenment doesn't require leaving the body. It requires remembering while still in the body. This is resurrection, the voice said. Not life after death, but awakened life before death. This is what he came to show. This is what they tried to hide. This is what you now know. Caleb's consciousness slowly condensed back into physical form. He felt his body again, heavy, dense, beautifully limited. He opened his eyes. Sunlight streamed through his window. Morning had come. He had slept for hours but felt more rested than he had in years. He sat up slowly, looked at his hands, felt his heartbeat, breathed deeply. Everything looked the same: the cabin, the furniture, the books scattered on his desk. But everything was different, because he was different, fundamentally, irreversibly, completely. The man who went to sleep last night no longer existed. Someone new had awakened in his place, someone who remembered, someone who knew, someone who couldn't pretend anymore that he was just a guilty sinner waiting for death. Caleb Rogers had died in the night, and something infinite wearing his name had been born. Caleb walked outside into the desert morning. The sun was just clearing the horizon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. The air was crisp, clean. He filled his lungs and felt more alive than he could remember feeling in decades. He walked to where the craft had landed. The circle was still there, burned into the sand and rock, not scorched. More like the ground itself had been reorganized at a molecular level. The pattern was geometric, perfect, beautiful in its precision. He stood in the center of it and closed his eyes. Immediately, he felt the energy, the same frequency that had surrounded him in the craft. It was still here, subtle but present, like a doorway had been opened that couldn't be fully closed. Nothing was a dream, he whispered to himself, or maybe to God, or maybe there was no difference anymore. He opened his eyes and looked at his cabin. It seemed smaller somehow, like he had grown too large to fit comfortably in his old life. Inside, he made coffee. The mundane act felt surreal after the night he'd experienced, but that was part of the teaching, wasn't it? Heaven and earth weren't separate. The sacred and the ordinary were the same thing seen from different perspectives. He sat at his desk and opened his journal. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up a pen. Where did he even start? How could words possibly contain what he'd experienced? But he began writing anyway, not trying to explain, just trying to record, to document, to preserve the memory before the rational mind could explain it away. He wrote about the lights, the being, the craft, the revelations about Jesus and consciousness and the nature of reality. He wrote until his hand cramped, until the coffee grew cold, until the morning sun climbed high enough to flood his cabin with light. When he finally stopped, he had filled 27 pages. He read back through them. The words seemed inadequate, like trying to describe color to someone born blind. But they were something, a record, a testament, proof to his future self that this had been real. His phone rang. He'd forgotten he even had a phone. The sound was jarring, a reminder that the normal world still existed and still had claims on his attention. It was his sister. They hadn't spoken in 6 months. Hello? Caleb, are you okay? I had the strangest feeling last night, like something happened to you. I almost called, but it was so late. Are you all right? He smiled. The connection between consciousness. She had felt something. From 3 states away, she had felt his transformation. I'm better than all right, Sarah. I'm awake. What does that mean? It means I finally understand what I've been searching for. It means everything changed last night. It means... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. It means I'm ready to come back to life. They talked for an hour. He didn't tell her about the being or the craft. Not yet. That would come later, if it needed to come at all. But he told her about the insights, about understanding God differently, about releasing guilt and shame, about feeling connected to something larger than his isolated existence. She cried, said she'd been praying for him, said she knew something would break through eventually, said she'd felt him slipping away over the years and hadn't known how to reach him. When they hung up, Caleb felt the truth of what the being had taught. Consciousness was connected. Prayer was real. Love transcended distance. Nothing was separate, even when it seemed that way. He spent the afternoon walking the desert, touching rocks that felt alive now, watching birds that seemed to be participating in some cosmic dance he could finally perceive, feeling the earth beneath his feet, not as dead matter, but as a living entity breathing in slow, planetary rhythms. That evening, he sat outside and watched the sunset. The colors were more vivid than he remembered, or maybe he was just seeing them clearly for the first time. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, he felt a presence, not physical, not the alien returning, but something else, the presence of being watched, of being loved, of being part of something infinitely larger than his individual story. He spoke into the darkness, not sure if he was talking to the being, to Jesus, to God, or to himself. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell people or just live quietly with what I know. I don't have a plan. I don't have answers. But I'm here. I'm awake. And I'm willing. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and sand. And in that wind, he heard or felt, or somehow just knew, a response. That is enough. Willingness is all that is required. The rest will unfold naturally. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Trust that you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do. The kingdom of heaven is not a destination, Caleb. It is the journey itself, and you are walking it now, consciously, deliberately, beautifully. He sat in silence for a long time, watching stars that he now understood were conscious, spinning in a universe that he now knew was alive, playing a role in a story that he finally comprehended was about God remembering himself, through infinite expressions of forgetting and awakening. The night was cold, but Caleb didn't feel it. He was warm from the inside out, burning with a fire that would never be extinguished because it was fueled by truth itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, questions from neighbors who might see the burn circle, doubts from his own mind trying to rationalize the irrational, the slow, difficult work of integrating cosmic consciousness into daily human life. But tonight, he simply sat in the desert under infinite stars, feeling more connected to God than any church service had ever made him feel. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 3 days passed before anyone saw Caleb outside his cabin again. When he finally emerged, something about him had changed. Neighbors who barely knew him noticed. The way he walked, the way he looked at things, like he was seeing the world for the first time. Tom Henderson, who lived 2 miles down the dirt road, saw Caleb standing among the rocks at sunset, just standing there, hands at his sides, face tilted toward the sky, not moving, for almost an hour. "You all right, Caleb?" Tom called out, concerned. Caleb turned slowly. His smile was genuine but distant, like he was here but also somewhere else simultaneously. "I'm more than all right, Tom. I'm remembering." Remembering what? Everything. Tom didn't know what to make of that. He told his wife that night that he thought Caleb might be losing it. Too much time alone, too much grief. The isolation was finally cracking him. But others saw something different. Maria Santos, who ran the small general store in town, noticed when Caleb came in for supplies. He moved differently, deliberately, like each action was intentional, sacred even. "You seem different," she said as she rang up his groceries. "I am different. We all are. Every moment, every breath. We're constantly becoming. I just finally noticed." She watched him leave, carrying his bag with a peace that seemed to radiate outward. After he left, she realized she felt calmer, lighter, like his presence had shifted something in the air itself. Word spread slowly through the small community. Caleb Rogers had changed. Some said breakdown, others said breakthrough. A few whispered about strange lights seen in the desert that night, about burn marks in the sand near his property. Children were the first to approach him directly. A group of 3 siblings from the Martinez family found him sitting on a flat rock, writing in his journal. They'd heard their parents talking about the hermit professor who'd gone strange. They were curious. "Mister, is it true you saw UFOs?" The oldest girl, maybe 10, asked. Caleb looked up, saw their young faces, open, curious, unjudged by years of conditioning. "I saw something extraordinary," he said carefully. "Something that changed how I understand everything." "Like what?" the youngest boy asked. "Like, you know how you love your mom and dad? That feeling in your chest when you hug them?" They nodded. "That feeling isn't just emotion, it's real. It's energy. It's the most powerful force in the universe, and every person has it inside them, including you 3, right now." The middle child, a girl about 8, touched her chest. "I feel it sometimes, when I'm really happy." "Exactly. That's not just happiness. That's you connecting to something bigger, something that connects all of us. The stars, the earth, every living thing. We're all part of the same energy, the same love." They sat with him for an hour, asking questions. Not about aliens, about feelings, about God, about why bad things happen, about death. Caleb answered honestly but gently. He didn't preach, didn't try to convince them of anything, just shared what he now understood, translated into language children could grasp. When they left, they were quiet, thoughtful. Their mother noticed that night that they prayed differently, not reciting memorized words, but speaking from their hearts, asking questions instead of making requests. More people came, not many. This was a small, spread-out community, but word of mouth traveled. The professor who used to hide in his cabin was now sitting outside at sunset, open to conversation, and people who talked to him left feeling different, lighter, more hopeful. An elderly rancher named Bill stopped by one evening. His wife had died 2 months earlier, cancer. He was drowning in grief and anger at God. Caleb listened, didn't offer platitudes, didn't quote scripture, just listened with a presence that felt solid, safe. When Bill finally ran out of words, Caleb spoke quietly. "She's not gone, Bill. Energy doesn't disappear. It transforms. The love you shared, that's still here. Still real. You can feel it if you let yourself. Not as memory, as presence. Because love exists outside of time and physical bodies. That's not what the preacher says. I know. But what does your heart say? In those moments when you feel her close, when you smell her perfume on clothes she used to wear, or hear a song she loved, what do you feel?" Bill's eyes filled with tears. "I feel her, like she's right there, because she is. Consciousness doesn't die, Bill. It transitions, changes form. But the connection you built over 43 years of marriage, that's eternal. That's real. More real than these bodies we walk around in." Bill cried. Deep, body-shaking sobs. Caleb simply sat with him, present, compassionate, holding space for grief without trying to fix it. When Bill left an hour later, he wasn't healed, but he was different. The anger had softened. The despair had cracked open to let in possibility. Over the following weeks, Caleb became an unexpected anchor point for people carrying questions too heavy for their churches to answer. People dealing with doubt, loss, existential crisis. He never advertised, never promoted himself, never claimed special knowledge or authority. He simply lived what he'd learned, radiated what he'd become, and people felt it. The desert that had been his prison became his monastery. The isolation that had nearly destroyed him became the foundation of his purpose. He wrote every day, not to publish, not to convince anyone of anything, but to process, to integrate, to translate cosmic understanding into human language. Some nights he would sit in the burn circle and meditate, feel the energy still present there, the connection to something larger, the reminder that he wasn't crazy, that what happened was real. And sometimes on clear nights when the stars were bright and the air was still, he would feel the presence return. Not physically, not the craft or the being, but something, a consciousness observing him with love, encouraging him, guiding him forward. He would whisper into the darkness, "I'm doing what you said. I'm being, not preaching. I'm living it, not teaching it. Is this right? Is this enough?" And the wind would shift. The stars would seem to brighten slightly, and in his chest he would feel warmth, confirmation. Peace. Yes, this is exactly right. This is exactly enough. Caleb Rogers was no longer hiding from life. He was participating in it, consciously, deliberately, as an embodiment of the truth he'd been shown. Not as a guru, not as a prophet, just as a human who remembered what humans forget, and in remembering, gave others permission to remember too. The testimony wasn't in his words, it was in his presence, his peace, his certainty, his love without condition or judgment. And slowly, quietly, the desert around his cabin began to feel different, lighter, more alive, like something sacred was growing there, not in a building, not in an institution, but in the space between people choosing love over fear, connection over separation, remembering over forgetting. The light he'd been shown was now the light he carried, and it was spreading. One conversation, one moment, one genuine connection at a time. 6 weeks after the encounter, Caleb woke at 2:47 a.m., the same time the lights had first appeared. He'd learned to pay attention to patterns, to synchronicities. They weren't coincidences. They were the universe speaking in its native language of symbol and timing. He got out of bed without question, put on his jacket, walked outside. The desert was quiet, cold. Stars blazed overhead with an intensity that still took his breath away, even after everything he'd experienced. He walked to the burn circle. It had faded some. Wind and rain had softened the edges, but the pattern was still visible, still potent, still a doorway to something beyond ordinary reality. He stood in the center and waited. At first, nothing happened. Minutes passed. His rational mind started generating doubt. Maybe this was just his imagination. Maybe he was reading meaning into meaningless patterns. Maybe then the air changed. That same thickness, that same sense of time holding its breath, that same harmonic frequency he could feel in his bones. He looked up, 3 points of light, triangle formation, descending slowly toward the plateau. His heart rate remained steady. No fear this time, just recognition, like seeing an old friend returning from a long journey. The craft landed silently. The hull opened. The being emerged. But this time, Caleb walked toward it without hesitation, without question, without doubt. They met in the middle, human and visitor, student and teacher, brother and brother. "You have done well," the being said. Its voice in his mind felt warm, proud even. "I'm trying. It's harder than I expected. Living it, embodying it. People look at me like I'm crazy sometimes." Jesus was called crazy too. So was every awakened being who tried to share what they'd seen. This is not because you are wrong. It is because you are threatening the comfortable sleep most humans prefer. The being gestured for Caleb to follow. They walked together toward the edge of the plateau, looking out over miles of empty desert illuminated by starlight. "You asked if this was enough," the being said. "Living quietly, sharing with those who come to you, not building a church or starting a movement. Yes, it is not only enough, it is the only way real transformation happens. Through individual consciousness changing, through personal awakening spreading organically, through presence, not propaganda." Caleb felt relief wash over him. He'd been carrying subtle guilt, feeling like maybe he should be doing more, reaching more people, making bigger impact. "Impact is not measured in numbers," the being continued, reading his thoughts. "One person truly awakening creates ripples that affect thousands across multiple timelines. The children who spoke with you, they will carry that conversation their entire lives. The man grieving his wife, he will love differently because of what you shared. This is how worlds change. Not through revolution, through evolution, one consciousness at a time." They stood in silence for several minutes, just being, just present. "Why did you come back?" Caleb finally asked. "To remind you, to anchor the experience, to prevent your rational mind from slowly explaining it away as stress or imagination or temporary madness. What you experienced was real. What you learned is true. What you are becoming is necessary." The being turned to face him directly. "Your world is accelerating toward a choice point. More humans are waking up every day. The old systems are collapsing. The veils are thinning. And beings like you, ordinary people who have extraordinary experiences and choose to integrate them, you are the bridges, the translators, the living proof that awakening is possible." Caleb felt the weight and the honor of this responsibility simultaneously. "I'm not special," he said quietly. "Exactly. That is what makes you perfect for this. You are not a guru, not a chosen one, just a human who asked questions and was ready to hear answers. This is the message itself. Awakening is available to everyone. Christ consciousness is not exclusive. It is your birthright. You are simply demonstrating that birthright in action. The being reached out and touched Caleb's forehead. The same warmth flooded through him, the same expansion, but this time he could hold it, could remain present while experiencing it, could be both human and infinite simultaneously. Remember, the being said softly, when doubt comes, and it will come, remember this moment. Remember that you are never alone. Remember that consciousness is connected. Remember that love is not just emotion, but the fundamental frequency of reality itself. Images flooded Caleb's awareness. He saw his future, not fixed, not predetermined, but probable, possible. He saw himself continuing this quiet work, writing, speaking to those who came, living as an example rather than a teacher. He saw small gatherings in his cabin. People sharing experiences they couldn't share elsewhere, creating community outside institutional religion. He saw more beings like his visitor making contact with humans ready to receive. Saw a slow but steady awakening spreading across the planet. Saw the old fear-based systems losing power as more people remembered their divine nature. He saw challenges too. Resistance, mockery, isolation at times, but also support, connection, love from unexpected sources. You will not do this alone, the being said. Others are having similar experiences, similar awakenings. You will find each other, recognize each other, support each other. This is how the new earth is built, not through destruction of the old, but through creation of the new, one awakened consciousness at a time. The being stepped back toward the craft. I must go now, but know that we are always watching, always supporting, always celebrating every human who chooses to remember. You are loved beyond measure, Caleb, not because you are special, but because love is what you are, what we all are, what God is. Caleb felt tears on his face, not sad, not even particularly happy, just moved, touched by grace itself. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Thank yourself. You chose this. Before you incarnated, you chose to be here at this time, asking these questions, receiving these answers, living this demonstration. Thank your own courage, your own soul's commitment to awakening. The being entered the craft. The hull closed. The harmonic sound increased in frequency. Caleb watched it rise, watched it accelerate into the night sky, watched it become indistinguishable from the stars. He stood there for a long time, just breathing, just being, just existing in the space between heaven and earth, fully present in both. Finally, he turned toward his cabin. The sun would rise soon, another day, another opportunity to live what he'd learned, to be the frequency he'd remembered, to demonstrate that awakening is real and available and happening right now. As he walked, he whispered into the desert dawn, God never left. I just finally remembered how to see him, how to feel him, how to be him. The sky began to lighten, pink and orange spreading across the horizon. A new day beginning, a new chapter starting, a new human walking an ancient path with fresh eyes and an open heart. And somewhere beyond the stars, beings of light observed and smiled, knowing that another fragment of divine consciousness had awakened to itself. The journey continues. The remembering spreads. The love grows. One heart, one moment, one choice at a time. This is how God comes home to himself. Through us, as us, with us, always has been, always will be, forever and ever. Amen.